Today I want to talk to you about Chapter 10 and social behavior. There are a couple of preview questions that we're going to look at as we begin our discussion in this chapter. Why are some students kind and helpful, but others are aggressive? How should you handle aggressive students who defy authority? Well, the answers to these questions are going to unfold as we work through this chapter. There are reasons that some students just have that tendency to be kind and helpful to others in the classroom, kind and helpful to the teacher. And then there are those students that are very aggressive toward other students, toward the teacher, toward everyone. And there are underlying reasons as to why we have these two different natures of children in a given classroom. It's very important that you, as a classroom teacher, understand these differences and possibly even why this child has this behavior, this aggressive behavior, and why this child tends to be kinder and more helpful. For those students who are more aggressive, as a classroom teacher, you also need to understand how to help them, how to lead them from defying your authority into complying with your authority. So all of this will unfold in this chapter as we take a deeper look. Let's talk about pro-social behavior, which is basically a voluntary behavior that benefits others or promotes a harmonious relationship with others. Pro-social, actively and voluntarily doing or demonstrating behaviors that are going to be beneficial to others. It's also going to promote that relationship building with other people. Altruism is another form of behavior that will benefit someone else at the expense of one's own self. So altruism, you're putting others way ahead of yourself. Other people are more important than you in your mind and your thinking. Here are some examples of sixth graders who demonstrate pro-social behavior. They tend to want to comfort their peers who are distressed. They like to make others smile or laugh. Hence, we have a lot of comedians out there in the classroom. They share. Would you like half of my peanut butter and jelly sandwich? They're very caring and sharing. They compliment and encourage other people. They want and do invite others to join in with them. They do have a tendency to confront those who've done wrong, and they stand up for those people who have been wronged by others. They have no problem admitting their own mistakes and then turn around and apologizing for those mistakes that they've made. If they're able to admit their own mistakes and apologize for those mistakes, it also indicates that they have a good self-esteem and confidence in themselves and who they are. And they realize it's okay to make a mistake. And if I do something wrong or do something to offend or hurt someone else, I need to apologize. They have a tendency to use good manners. They want to break up fights, and they also have that tendency to give in order to avoid a fight. Okay, I give up. I let you have your way because I want to be a peacemaker. They are very honest And they really do avoid hurting other people's feelings. Other people matter and are important. The age trends of pro-social behavior in infancy and toddlerhood is that by the age of 8 months, their universal tendency is to be helpful and to share. By the time they're 12 months old, their sharing and cooperating with parents is so common that their absence indicates developmental disorders. So it's very common for them to share and cooperate with their parents. And so what the text is telling us here is if you see a 12-month-old that is not willing to share and cooperate, then there is some kind of developmental disorder with that child. By the time they're 18 months, these children try to help their parents with the chores. They don't want to be asked, they just want to be helpful. I can remember when my little grandson, Harrison, was 18, by the time he was 18 months old, and even now, he just turned 3. He had that helpful attitude, that helpful personality. And oh my goodness, if I was cooking in the kitchen, he wanted his little step stool so that he could climb up there and help. I learned very quickly how to give him a specific task at the other cabinet counter to keep him busy, and he thinks he's helping, but the food he's kind of chopping up or cutting, or the food that he's preparing doesn't necessarily make it to the serving dish, if you know what I mean. But as long as he was feeling, and still to this day when he's 3, as long as he feels like he's being helpful, he's great. He wants to help. By the time they're 2, though, their self-interest does begin to inhibit the impulse to share. And yes, I see that. My little granddaughter just turned 2 in March. She is very interested in herself. She doesn't, on her own, like to share. If she has a toy and she puts it down for a moment and her little brother comes and gets it, she sees that he's got it and she runs over and starts squealing and trying to take it back from him. Now, I learned also very quickly how to work with her in this. I would say, Clara, you have a turn with it. Now, can Harrison have a turn? And if I talk to her in that way and say, can Harrison have a turn? She will gladly give it to him and let him use it for a moment, but then she wants it back. If it's bouncing a ball, now in her mind, she wants to bounce it 5 times and then share it with Harrison, let him bounce it 1 time, and then she wants it back to have her turn again. So, but it is quite funny to watch them in this way. So, yes, her self-interest is inhibiting the impulse to share, but you can work with her and lead her into that sharing nature. Toddlers do express sympathy and comfort for others. Again, my grandchildren, a prime example of all of this content right now. We kept the children over the weekend from early Saturday morning until late Sunday evening. And sitting at the dinner table one of those evenings, Saturday, Sunday, I can't remember, but Harrison became defiant, and he wanted to get up and play with the dog, Ziggy. And that's a no-no. We're sitting at the table having dinner. So I told him to get back in your chair, and he ignored me. My husband said, Harrison James, get in your chair now. And he defied and said, no, I don't want to. So he got a slight little pop. Now, keep in mind, we're the grandparents, and we don't do the major because that's Mom and Dad's job. We're to just love them and let them have fun. But we did give him that little slight pop and on his bottom, and he said, he started to cry and whimper because, oh my, Poppy and Pippa scolding me? We spoke a little sterner and gave him a slight little pop on his bottom. And he got back in his chair, but he was kind of whining. I noticed Clara, the 2-year-old, she was sitting in her high chair and she watched him, and she had this look of empathy or this look of sympathy on her face for a split second. She just looked at him like, oh, poor Harrison. And then, of course, she went right back to her smiling and eating. But she did express that sympathy and that comfort tone for just a split second. Here are a couple of video links. The first one, I went to it and it wouldn't open for me. It has opened in the past, but just before I presented this material to you or began developing this video lecture, I went to that site and it would not open. So I went to another site and I actually just typed in Warneken social behavior on YouTube, and the second link down here popped up. So this link popped up, and this will take you to a whole page on YouTube of various videos, some lectures, some examples of pro-social behavior. Not only does this page include Warneken, but it also includes others sharing lectures and so forth. So go to this site on your own. I watched a couple of these videos, and that some of them are very lengthy, but they're worth it. They have a wealth of information. But I put this on here, and you can pause the video, copy that, and paste it into or type it into your search engine and go to these sites when you have time and observe some of these videos. They're very informative. The age trends in social behavior or pro-social behavior is what we're going to focus on now. Let's look first at early childhood. In early childhood pro-social behavior, they are more selective. The children are more selective with their pro-social behaviors. They truly are genuinely helpful when others are in distress. The pro-social children can also become somewhat aggressive. They're going to need lots of positives as well as the negatives. Now, I mentioned that earlier with my 3-year-old grandson. He became defiant to the extent of being aggressive with his attitude of, I am not going to comply with the rule of sitting at the dinner table and having dinner together as a family. I want to get up and play with the dog right now, and I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. He became aggressive with his negative behavior. We had to use both negative and positive reinforcement. We tried the positive. He rejected that, and we had to move to the firmer, a little bit more negative to get him back on track. Oh, by the way, to finish up that story, when he was sitting there whimpering and crying, we let him sit there for just a few, well, it seemed like forever, but it was probably no more than 60 seconds. And then, of course, his Poppy picked him up and walked him out to the other room and gave him a big hug and explained to him why he got in trouble, what the rule is, and not just the rule, but the fact that he said, no, I'm not doing it. So then he came back to the table, gave his Poppy a great big hug and said, I love you, Poppy. And then he resumed eating his dinner, and all was well in his world once again. So using the positive along with the negative is a very helpful tool when you are trying to redirect some of their pro-social aggression. Let's look now at the middle middle-age childhood group, they tend to display a wide variety of pro-social behaviors. They become so skilled at their pro-social behavior that they are assigned to take care of younger children. Oh my goodness. Again, there's just like a year's difference between Harrison and Clara, a little over a year. But Harrison likes to help take care of Clara a lot. If she needs a diaper, when she was doing diapers, he would run, I'll get it. He wanted to be helpful. He wanted to take care of Clara. Clara, here's your bottle, here's your milk. He wanted to, and there were times that he wanted to be so helpful that she would not want her bottle. This is when she was much younger. She would not want her bottle, but he would be trying to force it into her mouth because he felt like she needed it. But he does love to take care of the younger children. I can remember also another example is when I had my first daughter. She was 3.5 when my second daughter was born. So my older daughter, to help her in the transition of bringing home the new baby, and she's no longer the only child, she felt, and we explained to her, your responsibility is going to be to help mommy take care of her during the day. So she thought she was really Miss Big Britches, and she loved helping to take care of her younger sister. So they relish in those assigned tasks of helping to care for the younger children. Let's look now at the prosocial behavior trends in adolescence. Again, adolescents become more skilled at their prosocial behavior. However, they have a frequency of prosocial behavior that does not continue to increase. You see it in the early years, developing, being there, increasing, still increasing in the middle years, but by the time they hit adolescence, it plateaus. You do not see an increase. Why do we not see prosocial behavior increase? Well, adults have a tendency to train the children to inhibit those prosocial impulses, saying things like, that's the teacher's job. I did that with Harrison, the grandson, just the other day. Clara was at the TV center in the family room, and we have the satellite box, and we have, the dish, we have the video player, the disc, what do you call it, the DVD player. We have all the devices, the Roku, everything over there. And Clara loves to go over and push buttons and see things happen. And I told her, no ma'am, we do not do that. So he immediately ran over there and started grabbing her arm and pulling her away, saying, no, Clara, no, Clara. It was so cute. But she was squealing and resisting against him. And I knew that that would probably not end well if I let him continue to forcefully remove her from that situation. So I intervened and I said, Harrison, let Pippa handle this. This is Pippa's responsibility to handle Clara in this situation. So that is how we tend to train children to inhibit those prosocial impulses. His impulse was, he saw her doing something she's not supposed to do. He knows she's not supposed to do that because he himself used to get in trouble for doing that. So he's going to stop her from doing it. However, I could not let him continue to forcefully remove her from that situation. So I had to put a damper on his impulse there. Antisocial models also do not permit for the increase in social behavior, pro-social behavior. And this is definitely seen in the media. The improvement in regulation of emotions and impulse control. We are training our children at a young age to learn how to control their emotions and their impulses. He gets upset, we have to talk him through it. You can't throw a tantrum. You have to stop and think. You have to breathe deeply and regroup your mindset. So we train them in these ways how to control their impulses. Also, cost of prosocial behavior becomes very clear to them at this point. The results of my prosocial actions leads to this, or the results are this. And so they began to see and understand the costs of their prosocial behaviors. This is a chart, and you can see the prosocial behavior in a classroom based on the age trends and the frequency of those behaviors. Fourth and fifth grade. At the fifth grade, they're a little bit higher, but they're still very high in fourth and fifth grade. Then they decline in the sixth grade. Seventh and eighth grade, they decline even more. They shoot back up slightly in the ninth grade and then come back down in the 10th grade. And then by the 11th grade, they go back up. And then even in the 12th grade, they go up even more. They do not ever go back up to the range, typically, technically, okay, generally speaking. They do not go back up to the range of the 4th and 5th grade, but they do go back up. What predicts the prosocial behaviors? Well, it's their emotional competence and their level of empathy, the parental responsiveness, as well as the parental attachment to each child. Also, the parents' value placed on the prosocial behavior. The use of victim-centered induction. I want to explain this. Victim-centered induction simply means when a child does something, we appeal to his sense of emotion of how the victim feels as a result of what was just done to him. So we began to place that feeling of emotions back on the child himself so that he can start seeing it from the perspective of the child that he did the action to. Also, there's the reinforcement. The tangible rewards may decrease, and when they do, the praise needs to increase. In fact, the tangible rewards definitely need to begin decreasing, and we need to begin using praise more frequently for the reinforcement of the correct prosocial behaviors. And then, of course, practice everything and anything that we learn to do well, and that becomes a habit, a second nature to us, requires practice. Classroom implications of the prosocial behavior are as follows. The prosocial students are more engaged in the classroom. They tend to promote achievement of their classmates, especially those students who are at risk. I remember doing a study when I taught 10th grade. I taught the pre-AP 10th grade English students, and I studied with them the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, but it was in the unit theme of racial and social injustice. So as we were going through To Kill a Mockingbird, and we were looking at how Boo Radley was mistreated by the community, social injustice was dealt upon him. We looked at the racial injustice as we looked at, and oh my goodness, I just now lost his name, but the man who is accused of rape and held on trial when it actually wasn't him. So if you haven't read the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, oh my goodness, you please need to read that. But the racial injustice that was done to him, that I remember studying that with my students, and that conversation led to, and of course along with that we covered the civil rights movement and the racial injustice. We looked at the social injustice, and we looked at all these different avenues of how, and we began to unfold a discussion on how people are mistreated. And then that led to a conversation of, well, right here in our very school, who do you see that is mistreated because of their social condition, their physical condition, And so we began to unfold all of these types of scenarios within our school and in our school building. And they really focused on those students who were physically challenged, emotionally, mentally challenged. And they began to say, I used to be mean to those people. And I remember that conversation with this one particular group of students, and they began to feel sad. And I saw tears coming down their faces on several of these students while we had this conversation. And they began to say, oh my goodness, what can I do now? I see this going on. I see how these students are treated in the cafeteria. I see them in the hallway. What can I do to make a difference? And they stepped up, and for the remainder of that year, they began, this was at the very beginning of the second semester that we did this. So throughout the whole second semester of their 10th grade year, they began to do projects and things to bring those students in. They put together a skit. They read a novel, created puppet skits, and they invited those students to come in, and they provided snacks. It was kind of like we went down to our special ed department and we invited those students, and it was kind of like they invited them to a dinner theater or a snack theater show, just because they wanted to do something nice for them. And I saw them in the hallway helping them with their books, talking with them, just trying to befriend them. I thought that was a very special class project, and it was a student-led and student-driven project that they did the whole rest of that semester in reaching out to those at-risk students in our school building. I'm sorry I spent so much time on that, but that was a very good example of that scenario. Fostering pro-social behavior. How can we do that? We want to reinforce, but again, I said this earlier, not with tangible, but we want to do it with praise, reinforcement. We want to provide models of pro-social behavior. We want to model that for our students. Yes, we definitely want to use the victim-centered induction. There were many times that I pulled a student, whether I taught in elementary or high school, I would pull a student down the hallway and say, what you just did, think about that. How would you feel if that were done to you by someone else? And I would actually sit and have a really in-depth, serious conversation with them, getting them to realize what that person felt on the inside. And another example of that was, the 10th grade pre-AP English group, and how they began to see the actual victims, and they began to feel what those people were feeling. That really is a good model to foster, a good method to use with students. Also, you want to foster the ability to improve their emotional competence, how they feel and how they express their gratitude. You express it to them and teach them how to express it to others. You will also be able to improve their moral reasoning as you go through each one of these previous steps. Establish warm, secure relationships with your students. Let them feel that they have just stepped into your classroom, which is a very safe and warm and caring and compassionate environment. And they will feel very secure in there, and they will feel secure with the relationships that they're building in that classroom. And then talk about the pro-social values. Talk about it to them. Many of them may not be taught these things in their home environment. They may not have those kinds of conversations in their homes. So you have those conversations with them. Also, help the learners to feel responsible for others. You're not here just for yourself, but you're here for other people as well. And sometimes what you do to others makes a world of difference and really helps them along the way. Give them opportunities to put this into practice. Provide them with as many opportunities as possible. I promise you, if you can lead them into these kinds of conversations and present this kind of model, they will begin to come up with scenarios in which they can implement these practices inside the classroom as well as outside the classroom, just like I did with the pre-AP 10 group. It really does make a world of difference. Caring teachers. Let's talk about the caring teachers for a bit. I've seen both. I've worked with both as department chair, as district chair, district department chair, as building lead teacher. I saw both kinds of teachers. And a caring teacher's behavior is going to help each student academically. It's this teacher is going to ask, if you need help, please call on me. Please let me make sure that you are understanding everything that I'm teaching you. The non-caring teacher, on the flip side, they're not going to care about explaining things. They don't care to answer your questions. They don't try to help you. I've seen those teachers that students ask a question and then the student feels like they were a huge burden to the teacher. Some of my students, some of you all today, you'll send me an email and say, I don't mean to bother you, but I promise you, I am very busy. Yes, I'm very, very busy, but I am never, ever too busy to help you if you have a confusion or you have an issue. I want to help you because I want to see you become successful and accomplish your goals and learn, the materials that you need to learn so that you can then step out and be a very caring and compassionate teacher. A caring teacher also makes special effort. This caring teacher is going to teach in such a special way that it makes the class interesting. Now, a non-caring teacher on the flip side is going to get off task, teach students while they're not paying attention. The teacher is also going to come across as being boring. Therefore, the students are bored in the classroom. And I know you've had those kinds of teachers. I have. I've had those teachers where, oh my goodness, I had one teacher I remember, and I was in college. It was my undergrad work, and it was one of my reading classes. I don't remember the name of the class, but intensive reading or something like that, because I was focusing on English as my major. But I remember he would lecture, and basically his lectures were coming straight out of the textbook. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I read this chapter last night. He's saying the same thing I read. In order to pass this test, as long as I read the chapter, I know the content material, and I'm good to go. But his voice was also very monotone. And let me see if I can implement this. I have a hard time doing this. get off task, teaches while students aren't paying attention, boring, makes special effort, teaches in a special way, makes class interesting. Okay, that was hard for me to do, but he spoke in that monotone voice. He never used inflections, he never changed his pace. Um, he just was straight across the board, and it was an hour and a half long, and it was so boring, and it was, early in the morning, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to fall asleep. So the only way that I could stay alert and awake in his class was to write down every single word he said as he's talking. I was just taking notes on everything he said. I did not need to take those notes because, as I said, it came straight from the textbook, but it gave me something to do. And if he ever called on me, which he did frequently, I would be on task because I was right where he was. I was writing down what he was saying so I could respond if he did call on me. But those teachers that have that tendency to teach in that way, it becomes very boring to the students. Those are the teachers that have the attitude of, hey, I don't care about you. I'm just here. I've got to cover the content material. I've got to do my job so I can get my paycheck. And that's all that matters. And that's terrible. Let's move on. Caring teachers have the attitude of, talk to me. I'm paying attention when you talk to me. I'm listening. I want you to ask questions because I want to have this conversation with you so that I know you're understanding. And if you're not understanding, I want to help you understand it. I used to tell my students, I really never gave them the answers when we were having a literary analysis discussion, but I wanted them to ask their questions. And I would always turn their question into a question. They might ask me, what is the author really saying here? And I would say, well, I don't know. What do you think the author is really saying here? And I would tell them, guys, I want you to have a conversation with me. I don't want to just give you information so we can just get through it. But I would tell them, you, as we're having this literary discussion, you are my literary colleague, and your insight into what the author is saying is very important to me, and sometimes you might give me a perspective that I haven't had, so I need your input also. That's the kind of teacher that is a caring teacher, as opposed to a teacher who screams, yells, ignores, and interrupts. I've heard those. I remember one day when I was teaching in the classroom, I could hear a teacher next door screaming and yelling at her students, I'm tired of listening to you. Will you please shut up and sit down and get back to your worksheets? And of course, everything that she just said totally went against the grain of how I teach. Don't do worksheets. You may have a worksheet that is your guide, but you're going to be doing a lot of things with it, typically in small groups. Screaming and yelling, shut up, that's a word I don't use with people, with my students. That's just, everything about that kind of teacher just went against my grain. Please don't be that kind of teacher. A caring teacher also asks, what's wrong? I can tell you're upset today. Do you want to talk? Tell me what's going on. What has you so upset? As opposed to the non-caring teacher who tends to forget the student's name, doesn't ask why the student is sad, doesn't seem to care if the student, if something is wrong with that student. That teacher is just, again, they're focused on, I've got to cover this material so that I can get my paycheck at the end of the month. Okay. A caring teacher is going to compliment and encourage teachers. He's going to check their work periodically, basically frequently while the student is working on it. This teacher is going to tell the student when they've done a good job, and the teacher is going to praise that student. Even if the student has done the assignment incorrectly or has missed one of the problems or whatever, the teacher's going to say, you did a great job attempting this. Let's work together and see if we can figure out where you made your mistake. Okay, that's a positive way of telling the student, that they did this incorrectly and guiding them into working it out correctly. As opposed to the non-caring teacher who says, I'm tired of you, go to the office, I can't deal with you anymore, you're going to make bad grades, and that's your problem. Not caring. Whoops. I think I went, okay, sorry about that. I did it again. The last one is trust me. The teacher trusts the students. The student trusts the teacher. If the student tells the teacher something in confidence, that teacher is going to keep that confidence. That teacher is going to respect the student, and he's going to avoid hurting the student's feelings. I think that part may have cut off in the video, but it says, trusts me, tells the truth, keeps promises, respects students, avoids hurting students' feelings, as opposed to the non-caring teacher who has no problem embarrassing the student, insulting or picking on the students, making the student feel like an imbecile because they don't know the correct answer. Think about this. Does forcing children to do an activity result in intrinsic motivation for that activity? Could mandatory service promote moral development under any conditions? That is for you to think about. Again, you know my nature. I just told you my nature as a teacher is to not give you all of the answers, but to tell you to go back to chapter 7 and to chapter 9 and see if you can figure out the answer to that. Come up with your own idea of that and make sure that you know how to defend your answer. Now, no, that is not an additional assignment that you have to do. That's just something for you to think about, and maybe you don't have time to do that right now, but later, if you want to come back to this and do that and see what you come up with, that would be a very good task for you to do and to process and think about later. Okay, antisocial behavior and aggression. This is the behavior that disrupts the functioning of society. Antisocial, it's the opposite of what is acceptable in social behavior scenarios. Aggression is a form of the antisocial behavior. This behavior, this aggression, sometimes tends to harm or to dominate another person. A very aggressive person just over exerts himself, inflicting harm or totally dominating another person in their behaviors. Bullying is also a type of aggression. This is something you're going to deal with a great deal in your classroom. Yes, this does stem from home environments. Oftentimes, and I have seen this over and over, and I've dealt with this, especially in the male students, their father is a bully, is a very aggressive bully, feels he has the right to be overly aggressive and domineering over women. And so, and I dealt with this a lot with the teenage boys in my classroom. Not a lot of them, but I have dealt with this in that same young man who has observed this characteristic in his father tends to implement that in the classroom. And yes, oftentimes if the teacher defies his ways of thinking, then he's going to assert that domineering behavior and bullying aspect even to his teacher, which you know is not acceptable as a classroom teacher. So think about that and pay attention to that in your classroom as a teacher. Clinical levels of antisocial behavior. We see the oppositional defiant disorder, also known as ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. This is the clinical diagnosis that's given to students who are under the age of 8 and are excessively antisocial for at least 6 months consecutively. They are defiant. They are hostile toward authority figures, and they are verbally aggressive. And then we have also something known as the conduct disorder, also known as CD. This is the clinical diagnosis that's given to older children who are excessively delinquent or aggressive for at least 6 months consecutively. Whoops, I went too far again. Okay, what predicts that a child is going to have a CD or an ODD diagnosis? Okay, family dysfunction, the parental rejection, if the parents give extremely harsh discipline frequently, if the parents or a parent is abusive, if there is marital discord in the home, or if the parents themselves suffer from antisocial behaviors. And also their genes. Genetics can contribute to this predisposition. So it could be in their genetic makeup. Here are the types of aggression. We have the physical aggression, which is harming other people by a means of being physical, hitting them, pushing them, kicking them, etc. We have the verbal aggression, which is harming others through a means of using words to threaten them or call them names, telling them that they are stupid, any kind of a verbal aggression. We have the social aggression. Social aggression is harming others by manipulating them, by manipulating their relationship or manipulating their peer status. I am not a fan of I'm not a fan of any of these by any means, but it seems like the manipulation is a softer, quieter form in which you make someone feel guilty if they don't do something your way. That just gets all over me when I see people doing that. Spreading rumors or excluding the victim from a social clique is another example, or are two other examples of that. And this is also sometimes referred to as the relational aggression. Types of aggression. We have the reactive aggression, which leads also to retaliation. You do something to me, I'm going to retaliate. Usually it's going to involve anger or frustration, okay? Naturally. You do something to me, I'm going to react by aggressively, out of my anger, retaliating upon you, and I'll get even. It's like I'll get even with you. Proactive aggression, it's not clearly provoked, and the goal here is to achieve your own personal objectives. If I do this, then this person will react and do this. Instrumental aggression is the proactive aggression, and the goal here is to obtain an object, territory, or privilege, but doing so without hurting the victim. I'm going to do the instrumental aggression just to get what I want, but I'm going to be very careful that I don't hurt someone as I'm doing it or getting it. Hostile aggression, of course. The goal there is being reactive or proactive, either one, but the goal is I'm going to hurt you if I have to. and I'm going to take it. I'm going to get what I want, even if you get hurt. You don't matter. Here are some of the concepts to think about: the verbal, the social, the proactive, the reactive, the instrumental, and the hostile. I'm not going to go into this for time purposes, but this is something that you can come up with some of your own examples of a verbal aggression, a social aggression, a proactive, reactive, instrumental, and hostile aggression. Bullying. This is another type of aggression. The goal here is bullying. You are proactive. You're doing it beforehand. And the goal here is I'm going to intimidate you, or I'm going to dominate over you to force you to do what I want to be done. This involves someone of a greater power basically victimizing someone else who seems to be of a lower status or of lower power. We do this a lot of times with people with we don't. Okay, when I say we, I'm speaking generally, not that we all do this, but a person who is a bully is going to find that person who has a low self-esteem because they're the easy target for bullying. This also is going to reoccur repeatedly over time. This is not something that, I'm just going to do this to you today and then move on. No, when a bully sees that they are successful in bullying another person and continuing to reduce them down, they're going to keep doing it again and again and again. Cyberbullying occurs, of course, as you know, through the internet. This is tearing people apart on social media. This is a big, big thing, and ranting and belittling other people on the social media sites. Cyberbullying. Okay, types of aggression. We have proactive and reactive. Okay, the instrumental aggression, we've already talked about all these, but this is using some type of instrument to get what you want. The reactive it leads to, oftentimes reactive is going to lead to the hostile aggression, which can also lead to the retaliation. The proactive can lead to hostile aggression as well as to bullying. Okay, so proactive can trickle down to hostile and down to bullying. Victims of aggression. 5 to 20% of students are regularly victimized in a school year. 5 to 20%. Submissive victims are physically weak. They are the friendless people. They cry easily and they worry tremendously. Aggressive victims get hot-headed with poor emotional regulation. They can't control it, and they tend to provoke their bullies. The age trends here in antisocial behavior. In infancy and toddlerhood, we see that infants are not capable of aggression just yet, but they are capable of anger. You just let a child lie there without his bottle for a bit. He starts to cry. He cries even harder, and then he gets red-faced and tears start spurting out, and he's crying and screaming. Aggression towards peers is apparent around the age of 12 months, and the physical aggression increases from the ages of 1 to 2 years, and they primarily engage in the instrumental aggression. In the early childhood years, by the age of 2, the physical aggression peaks, then it tends to wane off. It's replaced by the verbal aggression at that point. Between the ages of 2 and 4 years old, the child becomes most aggressive And language reduces the need for the instrumental aggression. Middle childhood, we see the physical aggression diminishes and becomes rare when adults are present. Tantrums are typically present by the age of 8. Physical and verbal aggression may be replaced by social aggression. Instrumental aggression is rare, and most aggression at this age level is extremely hostile. Bullying emerges, but then it does begin to decline. And here is a chart. I'll let you pause the video if you want to really zero in on that and focus on this, but I'm moving on for time purposes. The age trends in social or in antisocial behavior in adolescence is that the aggression steadily begins to decline. We see a temporary surge in bullying, but it may transition to middle and junior high school years only. Delinquency increases, and it peaks at the ages of 14 to 15 years. Then it will begin to decline. Aggression may be criminal. Most crimes are committed in the late teens to early adulthood. That's when they start becoming extremely criminally aggressive. And here's a pattern. You can look at these different patterns of the non-aggressive, the childhood limited, the adolescent onset, and the childhood onset and the years, and how they increase and decline. And you can pause the video and look at that more closely if you would like. Here's the developmental path of antisocial behavior. We start with, if we have the early harsh parenting going on, that's going to lead to poor school readiness for that child. Unknown caller. I apologize. That is a call from Ohio. I'm going to let them leave me a voicemail if they really need to talk to me. Let me start that over. If the child has parents who are harsh in the early years of that child's life, that's going to lead to poor school readiness, and then it's going to trickle down to conduct problems for that child. That child is going to have problems with his conduct and behaviors. That then is could lead to a rejection, of course, by the non-aggressive peers. If this is a behavior problem child, the children who are not aggressive, they don't want to be around an aggressive child, so they're going to reject that child. It can also lead to academic failure. With the rejection and with the academic failure, we see the low parental monitoring. These are the parents that do not monitor their child's behaviors, their children's peers. They don't monitor their children's academic successes and downfalls. The commitment to the deviant peer group, at this point, these children move into that deviant peer group, and they become committed and attached to that group of students. At this point, 50% drop off the pathway. And now we move over into the adolescent years, and we see delinquency and violence. And then it also leads to becoming adult offenders. So you can see what happens, what begins up here with the parenting skills in the early childhood years can lead and continue to decline and go negative in their middle years, and then really go south in their adolescent years. think about the students in your classroom and think about their families. And that if you can delve into understanding what's happening in their homes, it will help you to better understand what's happening with that child in the school. Why is this child not prepared? Why is this child having conduct problems in the early years? Why, when this child gets to the middle years, why is he in complete academic failure and does not care and prefers to hang out with the delinquent or the deviant peer group? All of that factors in. Let's look now at what predicts these antisocial behaviors, the genetic and biological factors, the parenting factors, the coercive family cycle, the self-esteem, the social cognition, and the hostile attribution bias. Now, here we have the protective factors and the risk factors. If we have parental warmth in the infants, they are going to be sensitive. They're going to have positive parents that are likely going to lead to, they are going to become positive parents, and they're likely going to be less aggressive into their young adulthood. As opposed to the risk factors, these are insecure attachments. This happens at all ages. The effect is weaker for children from two-parent families because the stable families are a protective factor. So yeah, the more stable the home life, of course, the less the risk factor is on the child. Another protective factor is the firm control. If parents do not let their children stay up late, they don't let their 7th graders decide whether they can date, they're going to have children who are less likely to be antisocial. So in other words, and I remember doing this particular study back in my undergrad work many, many years ago. Children prefer school-age children from early childhood all the way up to adolescence and high school. They prefer to have boundaries and that firm control. They may tell you they don't want it. They may act somewhat defiant, but in essence, they really want it. They need that firm control. As opposed to the power assertive discipline, the spanking, and the authoritarian parenting, these tend to undermine the self-control. They tend to create angry, defiant children. I'm talking about there's nothing wrong with giving the child the discipline and the spanking if they need it. It's like with Harrison, we say you're going to get a pop-pop. We call it the pop-pop. Usually that's all we have to say is, do you need a pop-pop? No, ma'am. The pop-pop is different than aggressively, assertively spanking the child out of anger. There is a big difference. I'm the authority. You defied me. I'm angry with you as your parent, and I'm gonna beat you. You're doing it in the wrong attitude. There is a difference, a huge, huge difference. Parental involvement is a protective factor. Parental involvement such as monitoring, taking an interest in that child, spending time with that child. Now, parents do this. Most parents do this naturally unless they tend to be an antisocial parent. If a parent is in maternal depression, this is going to cause a risk factor in the early onset of the antisocial behavior. Religiosity. This is linked to children forgiving their aggressors rather than retaliating on them. It's just like I shared earlier in the lecture about Harrison defying and saying, no, I don't want to get in my chair. I'm not going to get in my chair. He had to be reprimanded. But then when it was all said and done, he was giving Poppy a great big hug and, saying, I love you, Poppy. It's all about how you handle the correction with a child. If a parent does not handle the child correctly, then it's a risk factor. And of course, and I think number 5 may be cut off from the screen. It may not show up, but number 5 is abuse and domestic violence on the risk factor. The parent who is abusive and implements domestic violence sets the tone to place that child at risk. Okay, this field observation, I'm not going to spend some time on this because I want to move on. Again, please, you can stop the video and review this and read this for yourself and determine this on your own. I need to move on. Okay, classroom implications for reducing bullying. From the previous chapters that we have already studied, we know that you need to avoid using retention in a particular grade, especially once they get, if you've got a 10th grade level child in the 7th grade classroom, you're going to have a problem, okay? So that child is much older. That child has different mindsets than those 7th and 8th graders. So it's going to lead to problems of bullying and aggression. Eliminate the hunger and the tiredness. Your children, if they come to your classroom and they have not had a good breakfast, they didn't have a good dinner last night, the only meal that they really had was at lunch at school yesterday, those children are going to be hungry. Some of these children are going to be tired. I've had students, oh my goodness, I remember a 4th grade student came in one day and he looked exhausted when he walked in. And during the morning lesson, he put his head down and fell sound asleep. I let him sleep because I could tell something was wrong. So later when the other children went to their learning centers and they were having fun in their centers, I went to him and I said, hey, Jesse, talk to me. What's going on? Why are you so tired today? Well, the police swarmed his house and he was up all night long. They put him in the back of the police car and took him downtown because the parents were having this wild party with drugs and alcohol, and it got out of control, and the parents were arrested, and the child was home alone, or so that the child wouldn't be home alone, the police took him downtown. They finally got him connected with social services, who finally got him into a home. But by the time all of that happened, it was early morning hours, and he only got a couple of hours of sleep, and then he had to get up and get back to school the next day. Okay, your students, you may have students experiencing those same kinds of things in their home at night. So if that child is hungry or that child is tired, you cannot teach that child. And if that child is not shown the compassion, the care, the love, and his needs are not being met, that's going to lead that child to becoming a bully or exerting some aggression. Be thoughtful about what you reinforce. Be very careful how you reinforce and what you reinforce to these students. Build their academic skills. Know that child, know how to teach that child, and lead that child to academic success. Establish a warm teacher-student relationship. Promote a positive climate in your classroom and avoid that power-assertive discipline. Also involve the students in the learning. Again, you've heard me talk about that in this lecture video, how I would lead the students to finding their own answers. I would lead the students to such discussions that would create that learning environment for them. Create a school climate that does not accept nor tolerate bullying. Teach witnesses to stand up for the victims. This goes back to that example of those pre-AP 10 English students. When they saw others in the hallway doing something inappropriate, bullying or doing something inappropriate to the victims, they went up and stood up for that student. You can teach them to do that in the same way. Provide supervision, especially in places where bullying is most common. And then screen for behavior problems very early. I mean, the instant you think you're seeing a behavior problem, make a note of it, chart it, and keep track of it, and then begin dealing with it immediately. Conflict resolution. The behavior, a conflict is the behavior of one person interfering with the goals of another person, and then that person resists and protests the behavior. That is not the same thing as aggression. Okay, there is a difference. Harrison had a conflict with what he wanted to do and what his papi wanted to do. He did not react in aggression. Harrison did not react in aggression and start kicking and slapping and hitting, but he said, no, I don't want to. He had a conflict going on, a little battle, and he had to be redirected in his behavior for conflict resolution. Some of the conflict resolution strategies are coercion. We have to make sure that you're going to do this way. You're going to comply because that's the way it is. You can also use disengagement. I'm going to pull back from you. Especially, I did this a lot in the classroom when I was a teacher. If I saw a student over here is doing a particular behavior, it might just be a little piddly-diddly disruptive type behavior. If I can ignore that behavior and focus positive comments to the students that are engaged and doing what I want them to do, this student sees that, hey, I'm not getting attention. But they are, and this is what they're doing to get that attention. So I'm redirecting him. I'm disengaging him and his negative behaviors. I'm ignoring him and giving attention to these students. So then he's going to make the flip, and he's going to start doing what these students are doing because he wants that attention. And then there are times that for conflict resolution, you need to compromise. And there are times that my students would come in and they would not want to do, and I would say, okay, now I didn't do this often, and I didn't do this all the time, but sometimes I would make a compromise with them. Hey guys, if we will do this, then on Friday, I will let you have some free time to do this. But it would be structured learning experiences, but it would be my way of compromising. We're going to get down to the nitty gritty. You're going to dig in. You're going to find some information. You're going to write some papers, write an essay or something. And then on Friday, we're going to take a slight pull back, and you're going to get to do this on Friday. So compromising. Across childhood, we see that there is a decrease in coercion. That is first replaced with the disengagement, and then finally we began to compromise in young adulthood. And you can even practice that little compromise with your middle school children. They can compromise. They can comprehend that a little bit. If we do what the teacher says on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, then on Friday she lets us have 30 minutes of free flex time doing whatever learning center games or whatever I want to do. Classroom implications for conflict resolution. Be authoritative. Model negotiation, model fairness, respect for others' views. Model that. Respect them if they have a view, and that's what I used to tell my students. You're my colleague in this literary discussion. Your viewpoint is very valuable to me because you may have a viewpoint that I have never thought of before, and I want to hear your input. I want your insight. It's very important. So demonstrate that to your students, even at young ages. They are real people. Some of them, for a while, they're just a little bit smaller. Okay? So treat them as a very important little person in your classroom. High school age, treat them as, just like I did, treat them as a colleague in this academic session that you're guiding them in, okay? Promote emotional competence. Promote social cognition in your students. Get them to be cognizant of the social implications that they are conveying and demonstrating. Carefully observe student conflict resolution abilities. Notice the students that have those capabilities, that just tend to have that ability to do conflict resolution, and expound on that and teach it to the other students in the classroom. Do not intervene unless it's necessary. That's very hard for us to do, to stand back and let them solve it, let them figure it out. And again, a good example of doing that, and students want the easy way out, especially in the academic setting. What's the answer to this? Don't tell them. Guide them in how to find it. And I know some of you have emailed me and said, I've had problems finding number 7 in my study guide. I typically do not tell you the answer, but I have responded to some of you and say, look from page 60 to page 69. Somewhere within that realm, you're going to find it. I'll give you some guided direction without the exact answer, because we want to lead children and students, not just children, but we want to lead students to be able to figure things out for themselves. Scaffold, compromise, and negotiation. We're going to work this out. We're going to negotiate a little bit of this. If I do this, you'll do this. If I take this away, will you give me this much work? Use compromise and negotiation. Peer meditation, or I'm sorry, peer mediation. Set some ground rules, like escalation of hostility is not allowed. Have your students to help you set these ground rules. Like week 1, when school first starts in August, kick off with, hey, we're going to set some ground rules for this classroom. I have some ideas, but I want your input. Help me set these ground rules. Identify the issues and define the problem with the students. Make each child's beliefs or views or emotions very clear. Find a solution that satisfies both students in a conflict resolution scenario. Okay, these are the trends. Now, you've been working on your chart. You've been working on your behavior chart. Try to include some of the pro-social behaviors, the aggression and the conflict resolutions that you have seen in the infancy and toddlerhood, early childhood, middle childhood, and adolescence in your chart. I hope that you have found this lecture video beneficial in understanding some of the content material that we discussed this week. And please let me know if you have any questions. And as any comments, if any of this sparked something in you that made you go, hey, it made me think of this, then please share that with me. I would love to hear your comments, as well as helping you work through your questions. Well, again, thank you for listening to this lecture video.